Our speaker today is Marilyn Roberts, who will be talking about the Mowbray family, the great medieval dynasty and the original Dukes of Norfolk, who were the masters of all they surveyed in the Isle of Axholme. This illustrated talk is based on Marilyn's book, The Mowbray Legacy, which takes a look at some of the leading family members, their luxurious residence in Epworth, and the lives of the ordinary people whose task it was to keep it going. So, thank you, Marilyn.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction. Well, hello there, ladies and gentlemen. Very nice to see you, and welcome to those who are joining us online. If I might just say something about the slide on here, I have with me copies of the book, and obviously I can't say a great deal about it. I can't put into 1 hour 400 years. So if anybody wants to have a look further about anything, for instance, the house at Epworth or the Mowbray deed, these books will be on there at the end, on the side, and do feel free to have a look in and see if there's any interest or anything that will answer your questions. And I'll be very pleased to answer your questions as well. So looking here then at the books, I wanted for the covers, I wanted something that appealed to me, that was colourful and actually left us in no doubt that the book's about the Mowbrays. And you see there we've got the lion on both of these. So the Mowbray lion, thankfully, although it is their badge, is quite simple to follow. If you're doing an article and you're writing an article, this is the kind of image that you want to be using. So let's have a look at what a really good version is. And it's at York Minster, and it's a beauty at York Minster. And it's got all the attributes of a Mowbray lion. Sometimes they are silver. On glass or fabric, they're inclined to be white. Why do I say on fabric? Well, if you're following Mowbray in a battle, and it's a real melee, his standard bearer will be holding the standard high. They always used to go for the standard bearer, didn't they, the other side? And if you find yourself following somebody with a similar lion, but not identical, you're following the wrong chap, and it could be fatal. So let's make sure, whenever you're in battle, you know what you're following. So we've got a silver lion in this case, but in some cases white. It's what we call a lion rampant. It's on its back legs, on its hind legs, and looks as though it's about to pounce. This one has a particularly fine set of teeth that you see at York Minster there. Not all of them do. It's going to be on a red background, and the tail is curving inwards. In the little book that's at the side there, that some of you might be taking, there's an article by a gentleman I worked with on some work in Epworth on the Mowbrays, and he's written about the lion. It's called the Silver Lion, and I think in a nod to me, because I was always going on about it, he says, remember, if the tail's not curving inwards, it's not a Mowbray lion. So that's an answer to me. So if you're following in battle, or you want to do the right thing if you're writing an article, any old lion won't do, it's got to be his chap. So we can't obviously look at 400 years, but we can set them in context. And our story will start in 1066 with the Norman conquest, but the Mowbrays won't be in this area, any Mowbrays, for 40 years. So we'll see why that is. We can only look at a few, and we shall look at Roger de Mowbray, the Crusader. We shall look at William, Magna Carta Baron. John, 3rd Lord Mowbray. I do believe if any of them were to be called the good, it would be this one. And Thomas Mowbray, 1st Duke of Norfolk. So these are the ones that we're going to look at. The 1st Duke of Norfolk was born in Epworth. So as we say, we're looking at the time of the Norman conquest, and I'm going to go first to the diagram, which isn't that particularly good, but it serves its purpose. And as you will see, The king, which in this case is Duke William of Normandy, is now King of England. He technically owns everything. Tough luck on the natives, but he owns everything. And he will sublet. And the feudal system is a landlord-tenant system right down until the lowest level, which are the peasants. If you look at the pink boxes, you've obviously got to give something back. And at the lower level, the lowest level, they will just give the labour and the fruits of their labour. The green boxes are rather misleading in that they use grants land. The implication might be that that land becomes owned by the person. It isn't. They're always tenant and landlord. And with any tenant-landlord arrangement, both sides have certain obligations. And beware if you don't follow those obligations. So, if we look at the word baron, the word baron, it doesn't mean what it means nowadays. Baron now means the lowest rank of the peerage, with duke, the highest. In those days, after the Norman conquest, it meant tenant-in-chief. These are the top layer of the tenants. The barons were very, very, very wealthy men. Normandy wasn't that big, of course. It's only part of northern France. The Dukes of Normandy were vassals of the King of France, but they did their own thing. And Normandy is their home, and they're fairly superior, but England is the cash machine. And they make sure they get their share. So the top rank of these barons are the equivalent of Branson today. They are mega rich. And if we just look at the little bit in the paragraph, among the most wealthy of the barons were Bishop Geoffrey de Mowbray and his nephew, great friends of the Conqueror. And also the major barons were their neighbours from the Daubigny family of Saint-Martin-d'Aubigny. So we're in where these two families are in Normandy, distance apart, about from here to Barham. Now we can see that Mowbray is going to turn into Mowbray, don't we? But Daubigny, the Daubigny person we're dealing with, it turns into something different from Daubigny. So Bishop Geoffrey he's a bishop, but he's a rough old lad, he's a soldier really. You wouldn't want to meet him on a dark night, Bishop Geoffrey, or any time really. He crowned William the Conqueror in Westminster Abbey in 1066, and he actually did the funeral service in 1087 in Cannes. So Bishop Geoffrey, mega rich, as is his nephew Robert, but they don't have any lands round here. I'm only mentioning them to put the actual area that we're going to talk about in context. William the Conqueror then has ruled Normandy and England, dies in 1087, and doesn't really make provisions for what people expected is going to happen. The barons, by and large, I believe, expected that Duke Robert would be Duke of Normandy and King of England, but that wasn't so. He was Duke of Normandy, so he's still the head of the family, it's superior. But William, his brother, becomes King of England. There's a sister, Adela, that we mustn't forget, and a young brother who will eventually be Henry I. So these are the children of the Conqueror. Now, while we've got the original arrangement with the Conqueror in charge everywhere, that's fine. But you can see now why there's going to be problems, because these barons have got land over there and land over here. Who's your master? Can you serve two masters? And it's very difficult. And these Mowbrays are among those who rebel against William, sometimes known as William Rufus, or William II. It fails, and to cut a long story short, they lose everything, and they've got no heirs. So the bishop, he goes back to die in Normandy, and the nephew is in prison in England for 30 years, remaining 30 years of his life. So William then carries on because the rebellion has failed. But as we see from our little family tree job there, in 1100 he's killed, and he's killed in the New Forest, the Royal Forest, the New Forest in Hampshire. And rumour had it that Henry, the brother Henry, actually arrived at the treasury at Winchester and got himself crowned before word of his brother's death had actually come in. What does this tell us? Tells us that he's no intention of Roberts, Duke of Normandy, becoming King of England as well. So moving on then, and I am getting to what's happening with us. Robert and Henry are at war, basically, and whoever delivers Duke Robert into the hands of Henry I will be very, very well rewarded. And let's see who he is then. He can't be a Mowbray because they've gone, but he is a smaller branch of the neighbours, the W's, who are doing very well, the major branch. Now Nigel is of a cadet branch really, but he's the one that delivers Robert into the hands of Henry I, and the reward is phenomenal. He's rewarded with lands in the Isle of Axholme, who previously would have been somebody else's, but things move on, they get taken back in and redistributed, and never held by the bishop and his nephew. So in Normandy, they get 20 manors that had once belonged to the original Mowbrays. And they get the one that they took the name from, Mowbray, and it means hill of mud, which isn't very exciting, is it? But there you go. And the king, when Nigel dies in 1129, the king decides that his son, Roger d'Aubigny, really needs a name separate from the rest of the d'Aubignys, probably not wanting them to get too powerful. They are a family after all. Let's split them off. And he says he's going to be known as Roger de Mowbray. If you just have a look at the names at the bottom, you can see how it's changed from de Mowbray, de Mowbray, de Mowbray, de Mowbray, and then just Mowbray. If you look at d'Aubigny, because he changed Roger changed his name from, there are several d'Aubignys in Lincoln today. And also there's a firm of builders that I've driven behind several times, and I wonder if you know what your background really is. It's an unusual name and it's corrupted to d'Aubigny. So, 2 words then in that title. We've got manor and we've got honour. So a manor nowadays we tend to think of as the big house, but of course it's not. It's the land which is the manor, and it may be a few acres, it may be a whole town. And if we look, these D'Aubignys are now in the charge of young Roger. They've got 250, which they can sublet. They can keep what they want. So the income and the reward for capturing Duke Robert was phenomenal. So what does an honour mean? Well, the name is going to be Mowbray. They've taken it from Mowbray, and honour just means a collective noun for all the manors. And they've 250 of them. They've more here than some of the established major barons. Now, let's have a look at what we've got then, because this is interesting to us. Starts in 1106, 40 years after the conquest. They've got 20 manors in Normandy that had belonged to the Mowbrays. But look at this. If there are only 20 in Normandy, then there must be 230 somewhere else. And look at the Isle of Axholme then. Amcots, Crow, Kidby, Hurst, Althorpe, Mosswood, I don't know Mosswood. Santoff, Root and Ellers, but look at the red ones. Belton, Bellwood, Beltoft, Butterwick, Epworth, Melwood, Burnham, Patsy, Ouston, which then was called Kinnaird Ferry. And if we look at Little Cross, there was a castle. Now, what does the red mean? Well, it means that they weren't going to sublet any of these. They're keeping them for their own purposes, their own use. In other words, what it's saying is, these are the cream of the crop. And it makes you look a just puff out with pride, doesn't it, really? With all that lot, these are the actual cream of the crop that kept for themselves, these 9. You've also got Gainsborough and South Ferriby in the Isle of Axholme. And the authority was, and still is, on the honour of Mowbray, a fantastic piece of work, was Diane Greenway, who researched in the 50s. And what she says is, the Isle of Axholme domains were the most important and valuable of the whole honour. So they must have had everything they needed, and that is amazing, really. Nothing in Nottinghamshire, only Thorpe Arnold in Leicestershire, and then the rest of them I've just put on one page. Now, if you look at it, though, all these are separate settlements of various sizes, and all were removed. So they're very, very, very wealthy indeed. Not many in Yorkshire, just South Cave, a little group near Kirby Malzard and Poppingham. So we know the first generation of the conquerors' families, children, were at war with each other. And sadly, so were the second generation. And even after 100 years, they were still at it. And Stephen and Matilda were grandchildren. Henry I, had 29 children. Well done, Henry. Unfortunately, only 2 to his wife. So he had only 2 legitimate heirs, and the boy was drowned in the Titanic disaster of its time, the White Ship disaster. So that left Matilda. And it's still like the Wild West out there. And the barons think that this can't happen. When he dies, a woman's not going to be able to lead us. So they went for the cousin. And I said early on, don't forget the conqueror's daughter, Adela. And Stephen is Adela's son. They're both grandchildren of the conqueror. And he's the choice of the barons, so he's crowned. Now, Matilda's not going to stand back and let this last. So the forces meet in Lincoln in 1141. Our Roger Mowbray as he now is on the side of Stephen. And with Stephen is taken prisoner by Matilda's forces. Kept prisoner a year, and Matilda realises she can't do it. It's just not going to happen. And the compromise is Stephen will remain king, but Matilda's son will become Henry II. So eventually, our Roger is released after his family paying a very, very, very large ransom to Matilda to let him go. The period is known as anarchy because in the reign of Stephen, things didn't settle. Known as the anarchy, and writers of the time said it was as if Christ and his saints slept. It was horrendous. If anybody's a Ken Follett fan, you want to read The Pillars of the Earth, because it's that covers this period. So what's Roger doing when he gets out then? Well, he's very religious. He founds many religious places, and in particular Byland Abbey, it's one of his. With one of his Daubigny relatives, Samson Daubigny, he founds Newbury Priory. And to Hurst Priory in the Isle of Axholme doubles his father's, I can't remember the word, donation, I'll say, to them. And founds a leper hospital in Leicestershire at Burton Lazards, which is the biggest leper hospital in the country and is very long lasting. So he does all he has to do. And he's a philanthropist as well. So very, very connected with the Isle of Axholme. Obviously, if they're the best lands, they're going to spend a lot of their time there, and their stewards will go around all the other 200 odd. Anybody who's familiar with Euston Ferry will know that this picture that I took from the churchyard a long time ago, this undergrowth has now been cleared, and you see more clearly, and I can just maybe show it on there, here now, that there's a slope. And on that slope stood his Motte and Bailey Castle, Roger's Castle. In time, Matilda's son becomes king, but he's not fighting relatives, cousins or brothers, he's fighting his own family. He's got this brood of sons, they're known as the Devil's Brood in the day, and they include Richard I, the Lionheart, and King John, who was just a baby at this time, a child at this time. And Henry II decides he's going to nip it in the bud now. He's going to have the heir crowned, Henry the young king. So he'll be in his teens, maybe perhaps even early 20s. And Henry's delighted, the young king. The only thing is, he wants to be the king, and he wants it now. So Roger, our Roger, who's by now getting on, supports the young king. And he's on the losing side. And this castle at Euston Ferry is pulled down in punishment, and his castle at Furs, and his castle at Kirby in Yorkshire, there, pulled down. So what's he going to do? Well, before we move on, can we just think back now? I wonder if any of us are descended from him. I doubt that I am. My folks weren't from this area, but we don't know. And I got involved when I was doing the research, just how many famous people might be. And it took me longer. Do have a look at the family trees in the book. It took me longer, really, I was long, to construct those as it did the actual research. And just a tiny smattering of people who can trace their ancestry back to. So the Bush president, remember, this is only a small selection, there's a handful of presidents. The Bush presidents, George Washington can, the Queen through the Queen Mother, Diana various through the Spencers, and then my very favourite one, Baroness Edda Kathleen van Heemstra Hepburn Ruskin. Her family tree is out of this world, and to actually put it together nearly killed me. But it's my favourite. I'm thinking I'm it framed actually. You name it, she's related to them. Even El Cid, she's related to him. And of course, her father, the Baroness, comes from her mother's side. Her father was an Irishman whose surname was Hepburn Ruskin, and when she was a girl, he used to call her Audrey. So here we are, beautiful Audrey, one of my all-time favourites, can trace herself back to, or could have traced herself back to Euston Ferry. Moving on then, I'm watching the clock very carefully here. Here I am, of all places, it's called the Baghdad Cafe. It's not in Baghdad, it's between Damascus and Aleppo. And it's about 15 years ago, before the hair went white. And I'm calling to somebody to say, have you got my glasses? I'm calling to the person I'm travelling with, and they had. Because what I want to look at is this. In Syria, obviously made loads of inquiries about Roger, the Crusader. And he went as an old man on a crusade to Syria. He went again. And I'm thinking, what a shock when you're used to Yorkshire and Lincolnshire and the Midlands to find yourself there. And I was saying to Kathleen earlier on, to find yourself there without the Imodium. What a shock that would be. Anyway, he's involved in a very famous battle of Hattin and taken captive. But he's worth more alive than he's dead. So he's ransomed, he's 68 by now. He's ransomed by the Knights Templar. You think of Temple Belwood, he was very well in with the Knights Templar, gave them land in Kidby, gave them land in York, and they ransomed him. But he died. He didn't get back home. His son died only 3 years afterwards, and he is Nigel, and he died in the Holy Land and buried there. And then his son, also on crusade, with Richard I, Lionheart, and he did get back. And he, if we see now, is one of the famous Magna Carta barons. So we should be really proud of the Isle of Axholme, I think. One of the 25 sureties was William from Epworth. So a little booklet I wrote about Magna Carta at the time of these celebrations in 2015. And if we remember that King John, we can't say much for time about King John, but really he wasn't playing to the rules. That's all we can say at the moment. And William de Mowbray was one of those barons that took it on. And it ended up with them getting the agreement, the Great Charter, Magna Carta. And they knew he would keep his word, King John. So 25 barons were elected to keep tabs on him. And he reneged on his promises almost immediately. You've got war, civil war now between the barons that support him and those that don't. He's lost Normandy. The French have got Normandy back in 1204. So he's not that popular as John. And the following year, though, after Magna Carta, during the Civil War, he dies in Newark Castle. Now, this would have been an opportunity. He's gone, the one they've got the argument with is gone. Let's make a fresh start. But the heir is only 9. Another Henry, will be Henry III. But with good regents and Magna Carta tweaked every so often that's laid down the law, it could be all right. But for some reason, Mowbray joins the barons that don't want this and supports the son of the King of France. So in a way, he's a traitor. And if he comes out of this, he'll be very lucky. The Battle of Lincoln is not like the battle that Roger was in. That was more of a skirmish. This is full-blown horror story. And we ought to know more about the Battle of Lincoln, because had it turned out differently, our history would have changed completely. We would have been a vassal state of France. We don't know enough about the Battle of Lincoln. So we've got our Baron, William de Mowbray, resident of Epworth, who is with the rebels and the French. And as I've said here, they're confident that they're going to beat the King's forces when they arrive in Lincoln. They were too confident because they didn't. But look where they're fighting. Look at the narrow place they're fighting here. What a rotten place to be on horseback, in armour, coming under fire from arrows, and knowing that if you're going to go escape down there, run down there, if you're driven down there, that steep hill, you're in a bit of a mess really, aren't you? And looking the other way, it's still restricted. So again, the Battle of Lincoln, one that we should be knowing more about. Well, of course, the horses are being shot down, the chronicler says, like this. And they're falling on the riders, and they're all in armour, and other riders are falling because they're so penned in. They're falling on top of other riders, and in the end, they're quite easy to capture. And the chronicler says, had it not been for Mowbray being so much connected with the other side through marriage, he would have been killed instantly as a traitor on the battlefield. But he's taken prisoner. Now, I just want to say, again, I wish I could elaborate a bit more for time, but King John had been working with the Pope, and the Pope had excommunicated most of, well, the country. And so their own king, the king obviously is only a boy, he's not there, but the king's troops that won, their own king had agreed or decided it was all right, because they were excommunicated, to sack the city of Lincoln to the last farthing. So they knocked it about, smashed it up, and stole everything, even the cathedral. But the bit, and time never changes, what the chronicler says is, to avoid insults, the women took to boats with their children on the River Witham, and as many as 500 drowned. And of course, to avoid insult is a polite way of saying to avoid rape. So a bad day for the country, and a bad day for Mowbray as well, and a very bad day for Lincoln. So again, he's very lucky. He's worth more alive than dead. As he forfeits some of his manners and comes back to his beautiful palatial home, like a mini royal palace in Epworth. Now, if you know Epworth, you know that that's St Andrew's Church. There's a very nice Mowbray lion in there, a proper one. And behind the trees, on the piece of land called Baghdad now, but wasn't then, this is where the Baron's great manor house, which is almost like a palace, actually was. Dies in 1224. What we're going to do now is look at the time for a start, and we're going to move forward 100 years because we can't look at all of them. And we look forward to the one that I believe, if any of them were going to be called the Good, it would have been John. Third Lord Mowbray, John the Good. Why are we calling him now Third Lord Mowbray? He's still a baron. So obviously his father was Lord Mowbray and his grandfather, and it's because Edward I has started what we call the talking shop in London, the Parliament, and these have been called to Parliament by documents called Barony by Writ. And the Mowbrays were among the first group called, so it shows how important they were. His grandfather, John's grandfather, Roger, another Roger, was called. His own father became second Lord Mowbray. It wasn't always hereditary, but it was with them. They were called every time to Parliament. His father, from being a lad, gave terrific service to the country and the king, but the king was Edward II. And again, it's a bit like John. We could be here till next year talking about what the problems were. And what we're going to say is that second Lord Mowbray was among the rebels who rebelled against Edward II and failed and was hanged at York. He was only 36. He was hanged at York, and that's a great pity. I've just put in red there, and it's by no means certain, but we know of the Haxey Hood game that we have 12th night, and it's supposed to remember that one of the great Mowbray ladies was in the Isle of Axholme and her hood blew away and the local yokels chased it, gave it back to her, and this remembers that. Not really knowing if it's a true or just myth, not knowing when, but the time frame that is sometimes given would fit the second Lord Mowbray's wife, Arlena de Bruce. So Arlena might be the lady of the Haxey Hood, but I'm not saying she is. Now, what happened then after her husband's killed and she's left with children? Well, her son, John, who becomes third Lord Mowbray eventually, is a lad of 11 and is put in the tower with his mother. And it was rough. And a lot of mothers and sons in similar circumstances didn't make it. They did. One of her older children, Christiana, who would only be 15 at most, was already married, so not involved. She was elsewhere. And if you are tracing those presidents I showed you, tracing their ancestry, when you reach Christiana de Mowbray, you know you'll take them back to the original at Ocean Ferry. So Christiana was the sister of John III Lord Mowbray. So what happens then is in the Tower from 11 to 16, and it's awful, and eventually Edward II is deposed by his own son, Edward III, and the Mowbrays are released. And it seems almost as if to make it up to them, because they hadn't done anything, he was just a kid. They haven't done anything. He gets his lands before he's really old enough. And his bride, his arranged marriage, is Joan Plantagenet, a very great lady who is a grandchild of Henry III. So we're getting now royal blood into the family. What's interesting is their heir, another John, born to this great lady, who's used to the best of everything, is born at Epworth. So what does this tell us about that house? It tells us it was something special. She wouldn't be snubbing it, would she, when she was giving birth? So it must have been somewhere special. The heir is born at Epworth. John reminds us just how much was demanded of these tenants, these barons. He's a soldier, he's a defender against the Scots. For months on end, he's at Carlisle and Berwick, the castles, he's the custodian there. He's a member of the House of Lords, which we'll call it. He's a judge. He also does something called the Mowbray Deed, died in 1361. And just a little bit of the quote. After he was in a battle at Neville's Cross in the north against the Scots, he's 36, but the person writing about it said, who usually got slaughtered after these, and they won. And he says, John Lord Mowbray was a man of grace and bounty, whose happy fame, worthy of extended praise, is widely known. So he wasn't brutalised in the Tower, which I think is amazing. Seeing his father killed, and his mother probably knocked about a bit in the Tower, and not brutalised there. So, I indulge myself now. I reckon it's about 25 minutes here. What was that house at Epworth like? Who knows? Not enough being found. If he was doing a new build, John, in the 1320s, this was the style of new build. This is item note in Kent. If he was refurbishing an old build, he would be probably doing extensions like this, just doing what it was like. Very sad that there isn't enough to be able to say, but it would be something very substantial. We are able to pick up a little bit about what life would have been like. It's from this book of Psalms. It's a psalter, and it's called the Lutteral Psalter, and it's made during that decade that he was imprisoned and released, made at Lincoln. And it's made for Sir Geoffrey Lutteral of Irnham, which is south of Grantham. Now, books very rare, obviously, books equivalent to a Ferrari, I would imagine. But I'm thinking that John, a man of his status, would have something like this. Now, what the Lutteral Psalter does, it doesn't only show religious scenes, it shows scenes from everyday life on Sir Geoffrey's estate, including ordinary folk. And I like to think maybe our John de Mowbray had something similar. So let's see what we've got. So this is Sir Geoffrey, and I've put the Mowbray lines down the side to remind us that, of course, if it was John, it wouldn't be blue and birds, it would be red and lions, the horse's caparison. The wife, who's seeing him off to a joust by the look of it, we must imagine is Joan Plantagenet, great-granddaughter of Henry III, a very great lady. And now I'm going to show you her Bentley that she used to drive around in, or equivalent of, along the bottom. So if you saw her coming through Epworth, in that you would know it was coming, wouldn't you? And this is the lady from Irnham, but Joan would have something similar. It's pretty fantastic, that, isn't it? So whether it's embossed leather or whether it's a sort of a stiff canvas type stuff, I don't know. But you need a few pounds coming in your from your tenants, don't you, to be running something like that. And as with the ordinary folk, things are showing through because the vellum is cast in and it's so thin, almost like tracing paper. So we've got the spits and very, very hard hot work, the spits in the kitchens. And a favourite of mine, a favourite of Catherine's as well, is archery practice. And this will be going on, whether it's Epworth or London or anywhere, because all able-bodied males between 16 and 60 could be called up in an emergency, an invasion, for instance, and they had to keep in practice. And I'd love to know what's going on here. This is obviously the instructor, he's better dressed. Is he saying, look, lads, that's how it's supposed to be done? Has he just shot that one? Because if they're new targets for that day, if they're new stamps, they're not very good, are they? Look at all the holes. It's full of holes. So I think, I wonder, I don't know, people will know, people study this for a lifetime, they will know whether it was a local joke. But the same sort of thing will be happening at Epworth, behind the church. Here we are, we've got somebody, an ordinary man now, allowed to get the acorns for the wild boar, for the pigs. Those acorns are worth having, aren't they? Size of those. And one of the very favourites. It's the expression on its face, sort of, who do you think you're looking at? Sort of expression. And what gets to my heart is it was done in Lincoln, and it was done 700 years ago as now. It really, and it's as good as the day it was made. If you're in London and you're at King's Cross Station, British Library, there's St Pancras in between, British Library, it's on show all the time. It's one of the treasures, obviously. Now again, what a wonderful piece of art, but what a sad subject. Why I'm showing it, it's the bear baiting, and if the entertainment was coming to town, they would put on a special show for, say, Lord John, and then do a show in Epworth and maybe in the villages. So there were entertainments, but wonderful piece of art, but very horrible subject really. And life was hard. These two look as if they're getting on a bit, and the soil is so dry, they're breaking it up. Remember, this is 700 years ago, these pictures. Different artist, the team of oxen now ploughing, and aren't they beautiful? Those oxen are just beautiful. I've missed the next one where the seed was broadcast, and I'll put this one on. So this is now covering the seed. And we see where we get one of our sayings from, because if we look what this fellow is doing with the slingshot, and he's got some pebbles in his apron, he's stoning the crows. Stone the crows to get rid of them. And another of my favourites, the little lad strumping the cherries. Now, was this a joke on the estate? Is he a lad that's known for it and allowed to do it? He's doing well there, but of course, watch out now, because my Lord Steward is waiting for you at the bottom of the cherry tree. And no matter who you are, if you're the king, or the baron, or the man in the hovel, you always need a good mouser, don't you? 700-year-old mouser. And I'd like to think, and probably not wrong, that John among his possessions would have had something very similar to this sort of thing. What we're going to get now is the great leveller is arriving, and this is the plague. So starts in Crimea here, and by 1349 it's with us. Difficult to take back, isn't it? That it was here. And Joan Plantagenet, saying no respect to persons, and his John's wife Joan dies. He's 39, she'll be about the same. So it's known she died in York, and documents prove that shortly afterwards he was in Epworth. So whether it was business or whether he just came just for a bit of a rest, who knows? The thing called the Mowbray deed, thank you. The thing called the Mowbray deed, which is the best known thing about the Mowbrays in Epworth, is something he made with his tenants in 1359. At the time of Magna Carta, the Great Charter, 1215, there was another charter being drawn up, the Little Charter, which is the Charter of the Forest. And where Magna Carta was the law, and really not for the ordinary man, the Charter of the Forest was, you shall be allowed to collect wood, you shall be allowed to collect reeds for your food, you shall be allowed to do this, that and the other, a bit of fishing, whatever. And something happened with John Mowbray and his tenants that his stewards were harassing them when they were doing that. Now, quite why, whether he appropriated some land and there was a misunderstanding, but he did the right thing, and he had a deed made between himself and his tenants, representatives. And this is the Mowbray deed, and it was very well received and kept in the church of Patsy until the time of the Moyton and the drainage in the time of the Stuart kings, when it very conveniently disappeared. If you want to know the details of the Mowbray deed, this is why I mentioned the book here, a copy of the book. It's in here, there were copies, and I've included the text of what it actually said, and it's quite interesting. So that was his good deed. We're looking now then at what happened, where we put him in red on this one, and sadly, in 1361, the plague took him. He was 51. He's left with several children. He's left several children, including his heir, John, 4th Lord Mowbray. Just before we go on and look at the rest, I'm showing Framlingham Castle here in Suffolk. And looking back, look at who his son married. So 4th Lord Mowbray married a lady called Elizabeth Seagrave. Elizabeth Seagrave was the daughter of Margaret of Brotherton, Countess of Norfolk, whose father was Thomas of Brotherton, whose father was Edward the First. So again, with royal blood coming into the family, and we've also only one heir for each generation, so we've got very rich royal blood. And eventually, the family seat, Framlingham Castle, and all the businesses, the manors, all the businesses will come, and the Mowbray connection with Epworth will gradually drift, with the Isle of Axholme will gradually drift out there. So sadly, John, Lord Mowbray, goes on crusade, dies at 28. Elizabeth Seagrave dies while he's away. Whether it was plague, who knows, probably another outbreak of the plague. So they're both 28. Leave several children. The heir, another John, dies young. And this is why the John, there's a break, because this one is a second son and he's Thomas. But we can see things are starting to move, because look what we've got. Thomas Mowbray, 5th Lord Mowbray, yes. Earl of Nottingham. Duke of Norfolk. Oh. Born in Epworth, 1366. And they continued until his grandson's time to be very connected with Epworth. So this, what time are we making this? Okay. So this is Our Thomas Mowbray now, in the very rich row, and this is his cousin, who is now in the royal circle. This is his cousin. You've got something outside there. This is his cousin, Richard II, and he's banished. We won't talk about why he's banished, because again, it's very involved, but he's banished, has to leave his wife and children behind, and dies in Venice. Now, is he buried in St. Mark's, which his family would have liked you to believe? No. He wouldn't mean anything to them in Venice. He died in 1400, 32 years old, 34 years old. He wouldn't be buried in St. Mark's, he'd be buried somewhere in the area. And if you read in various books and articles even now, people are trying to persuade you that he returned home to the Isle of Axholme. His remains were brought back. No. This is a model of Mount Grace Priory, and what he was building in the Isle of Axholme before he was banished was another one just like it. It would be called Low Melwood Priory, and it was between Epworth and Euston Ferry. By the side to Low Melwood Farm, on the left as you go into Euston Ferry, beautifully kept farm. If you look over, you'll see farm buildings, yes. Something that looks a bit different here, and this group of trees. If you zoom in on that group of trees, or you can get permission, you mustn't ever just go into a farm, it's a working farm and dangerous anyway. But they are usually quite accommodating if you want to look. And you see here that this is something different. This isn't a drainage, it's got an elbow bend on it, it's a moat. And if you go on to Google satellites, you can see it perfectly. It's the remains of a moat round the Carthusian Priory that the first Duke of Norfolk was building before he had to leave the country forever. The building, obviously not one of the originals, repurposed time and again, but if you look, there's something there. It's a bit medieval looking. And if we get close up to it, we can see that it's a helmet, and underneath is a shield, and on that shield is a perfect Mowbray lion, exactly as it should be. So why am I saying I know that he wasn't returned? Well, if he was, why would his descendant, the third Howard Duke of Norfolk, the Howards were our successors, why would he, at the court of Henry VIII, in 1532, over 100 years after the death, be following the Venetian ambassador and saying, do you think you could make inquiries about getting my ancestors' remains back? And then he adds the sting, of course, at as little cost as possible. And if you look through the letters and papers of Henry VIII, you can find them online, it's there. So you wouldn't be doing that if they'd already been brought back. Just a quick sideline here, we're right on the edge of the dissolution of the monasteries, and this man, Thomas Howard, 3rd Duke, actually watched the hanging, drawing and quartering of the prior that had come from this Carthusian monastery between Euston Ferry and Epworth. He actually watched his entertainment, and that was Augustine Webster. Very quickly, not even going to look at the Garter stall plate, the Duke eventually returned, and after 28 years, but the Mowbrays died, and the second Duke was buried in that priory, and he and his wife could still be there on the farm. No record of them being moved, and probably there. So nearly the last slide now, and I'm finishing almost, a couple after, but they're just pictures, is not enough children, but too many dowagers. And this was part of this was the jewel of the downfall, really. To be a duke and to do it properly, you needed to have megabucks. And by this time they didn't. And they had a catastrophe because after the first Duke died in exile, his widow lived another 25 years and was entitled to up to a third of the Mowbray income. And that's a hit, isn't it? She had only been dead 7 years when her son died, and his widow is then entitled. Well, this one, which we're saying is this one, lived 52 years. Now that's a major hit. What is even worse though, is that she outlived her son and daughter-in-law, but the daughter-in-law at one stage was, they were concurrent, taking all this money. It's just draining away. And it happened twice. There was an overlap in that 52 years of 13 years with one and 7 years with another. So basically, they're not far off bankrupt. So the other thing which added to their downfall was, of course, that there were only one-child families after the one that died in exile that had 5. They're all one-child families. So there were no cousins to help out, or males to marry if the last one turns out to be a girl. And Lady Anne, that was found under a Victorian railway depot in all her finery, well not finery really, in 1964, she was the last. So let's just see then. So, second Duke, third Duke and fourth Duke living at Framingham now, but still the Mowbrays hold the lands in the Isle of Axholme. Lady Anne is snapped up by Edward IV for the bride for his youngest, because he said once all these old women have died, they'll be rich again when they stop taking all this money. And he thinks it will be a good bet for his son. It's a big wedding in London. Everybody is there. She's 5, and the bridegroom's 4. Has to be carried with the bridegroom. He's 4 years old. She dies, and again, cutting the long story short, what happens now? Well, Edward IV tries to hang on to it, but after his death, Richard III restored it to the rightful heirs, probably valued support doing that, but he restores it to Lady Anne's nearest relatives. Remember, she's only 8 years old, not quite 9 when she dies, but her nearest relatives are men who are nearly 70, and they go right back to her great-grandfather's sisters. So Lady Margaret married a very ordinary chap called Robert Howard, and they could never have envisaged that their son would become Duke of Norfolk. The other sister, Lady Isabel, her son got the lands around here. And he's very aptly named William the Racer, because that's exactly what he did. He had no interest in the lands at all, traded them in with other people, and complained that it was all right having lands, but it was title he wanted. So after this is the end. After this, the lands gradually are dispersed. So just to finish, if you're in Hapsey, this is the Mowbray Lion on the post in Hapsey, and it's right, it's correct. And all these others are genuine Mowbray Lions. And just to say here again, if you would like to just have a look at anything else, do ask me, or I'll leave the books out and you can see the family trees and what have you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
That was really interesting. Do we have questions from online? To reiterate the question answers. So, for those of you that strict questions not in the chat, and then we'll take questions from the online as well. Just check what I said here. So we'll repeat the questions for the people online as well. So this is how we get on. Do we have any questions online to start with? Not at the moment. Right. So if people would like to ask questions. Yes, please.
Growing up in Sussex, not far from Arundel, which I believe is now city, and hearing names coming in Fitzallen all the time.
Yeah.
Is that some story for another hour's wonderful lecture?
Well,
Have I got there?
thank you.
Can we just repeat the question? You can
Yes,
repeat the
yes,
question.
yes, yeah. The question is from a gentleman who grew up in Sussex, yes, and is familiar with Arundel Castle and the name Fitzallen. And the name Fitzallen is cropping up all the time. So is that what we mean?
And Howard, yes.
And Howard. Well, the Howards, the original Howards are Suffolk, stock by name. So they are East Anglians, and they are another story. I've been 13 years researching them, and still haven't got the book done. Very, very interesting. And what we've got with your Fitzallens is that the one who died in exile, first Duke, his wife was Elizabeth Fitzallen, who was the daughter of the Earl of Arundel. Now, part of the other story for another time, Mowbray actually signed that man's death warrant, signed his own father-in-law's death warrant, so that wouldn't go down very well. The original castle at Arundel was built by those Daubignys who became the people who were here. It was built by the main branch, so they're all connected. Remember, they're only a small group, really, these barons. They're all intermarried and all connected. Now, how it came to the Howards, not through the Mowbrays. Elizabeth Fitzallen wasn't the heir, obviously. One of her brothers was the heir. And one of the later Howards, when they became Dukes of Norfolk, married two heiresses, and one was the Fitzallen heiress, and she died. So he became Duke of Norfolk. It was a bit, shall we say, some paperwork had to be done. What he also did then was marry another heiress, and she died without leaving him a child. No, she did leave a child, and the paperwork had to be done again. Now, he's the one, though, just a sideline, who thought it would be a good idea to try to marry Mary Queen of Scots and would oust Elizabeth. So you've moved on when you've got this Fitzallen connection with that area. Hope that helps, but you'd be very welcome to go online when I finally get things sorted online. Going to put all this sort of stuff online so people will know. Thank you.
Thank you. That's fascinating how everybody's connected. Has anyone else got any questions? Yeah.
I've always been fascinated by places there anymore between Dalton and Beltoft. There used to be a house called Temple Bellwood, and it disappeared when they put the M118.
Yes.
When you know anything about that, I always wondered why was there.
There are people who do know a lot about that, but I'm not one of them. But of course, Temple is the clue, isn't it? Because he was ransomed, Roger, by the Templars, the Knights Templar, and they had land in Kidby from him, which isn't the special group in the Isle of Axholme, but they had land. And they also, if you know York, St George's Fields in York, he made that over to the Templars. So yes, very much so. And also Hurst Priory was one of his fathers. So very much so. But there are pieces of work about Temple Bellwood if you look online, and people will, know more than I do about that.
We did say that when you listed the place in the Isle of Axholme, you mentioned Mosswood.
Yes, I don't know Mosswood.
It's the side of Hurst Priory.
It's what, sorry?
It's the side of Hurst Priory.
Is that it? Right. Yes. Yes. Right.
That area around there is Mosswood, and there's actually Mosswood.
Right. Well, thank you. Yeah.
So
Well-
for the benefit of people online, just to say, because they wouldn't have heard what you said,
Right,
we were just
right.
talking about the area of land called Mosswood, and there's a farm there, and this gentleman knows the area of land. Whereabouts was it between again?
It's between Hurst Priory and Belton.
Between Hurst Priory and Belton.
Yeah, and if I can just add, the gentleman mentioned it because at the beginning I said I didn't know where it was,
Yes.
so thank you for that. So that's a good example then, thank you for that, I did not know that. It's a good example that not all of these manors that we talked about were enormous. It would be a few acres, wouldn't it, that? Probably.
Up to 150 acres.
Yeah, so it wasn't huge, but big enough if you're getting income from it.
Okay, is there any questions online? Okay, we're just checking. If not, any more questions from the audience? No? Okay, no, okay. Well, thank you very much, Marilyn. That was
You're
really
very
interesting. And yes, do have a look at the books. There are some free books on the Isle of Axholme connected with the exhibition that are here in the museum, but also Marilyn's books. She has 2 books which are here on the screen, which are available to buy here or obviously online via queenshaven.co.uk.
We hope so. It's only just up and running again.
Yeah,
So
we-
we hope so. May I just add, the little book there is excellent. I had one the last time I came in, and there's someone called Bob Fish, and we've been talking about this, who I've worked with in the Isle of Axholme on various projects, and I always insist that if you're talking about the Mowbray lion, make sure it's a proper one. Never mind any old lion, just make sure. And it became a bit of a joke. And in this book, Bob Fish has written a bit about it, calls it the silver lion. And his last sentence is, remember, if its tail is not curling inwards, it's not a Mowbray lion. And I think he's done that for me, really. It's good to know somebody's listening, because I'm sure not many people do. But,
Okay.
but there you go. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much indeed. Thank you.